We are beginning this new chapter in our cycle of interviews from HYPIA, Hyperpolyglots International Association. We are here giving welcome to Dr. Ilker Aslan from Istanbul, Turkey, right now living in Zurich, in Switzerland. How are you, my friend? I'm very glad that to introduce you. And tell me a little bit about you first of all.
Hi everyone, merhaba, iyiyim, teşekkür ederim.
Thanks.
A brief introduction from my side. So, as Matias told you, I'm originally from Istanbul, Turkey, but for the last 14 years, I've been living in Zurich, Switzerland. And I've been living abroad for roughly the last 21, it's going to be 22 years almost. I left Turkey as soon as I finished high school, and I lived in 5 different countries before finally landing in Switzerland. So I started college in Germany, in Stuttgart, then in the middle of my university studies, I got a scholarship. I transferred to University of Texas at Dallas. I finished my studies there. Then I went to Denmark to do my master's in law. I studied law in Denmark, and then I moved to Belgium because I also got I went there first as an exchange student, and then I stayed on to write my dissertation. I was doing my master's in European Union law, so it kind of made sense that I spent some protracted stay in Brussels. And at the same time, I was working for the European Parliament. I worked there for about a year, a little bit more than a year, and then I got a job offer, and I moved down to Switzerland, and I've been here ever since.
Undoubtedly, due to your background and your jobs and your stints, first as a student, and then and later as your working within the European Parliament, and later as an economist. Undoubtedly, languages are indeed an added value to access information and also to communicate, but also languages represents cultures, and one of the objectives of HYPIA is precisely to foster and encourage mutual human understanding through knowledge of language and cultural diversity. What's your opinion about this this fantastic goal that mission, vision, and values that HYPIA has?
You hit the nail right on the head. I think, learning languages is something that everybody would like to do at some point, but some people take the initiative to spend more on it. Whomever I had spoken with, they always say, I want to learn languages. But I think one unique aspect of HYPIA organization and its members is that we are not just learning the languages. Okay, it's a lot of fun for us, but the biggest challenge for everyone, it doesn't matter which language you learn, but the biggest challenge that I have had in my life, and I'm sure many people would have the same sentiment in that regard, is that you learn a foreign language, but the biggest challenge is keeping that language relevant in your life. So I have dabbled with many languages, so I don't really consider myself fluent in a language unless I understand the jokes in that language, humor, irony. So these are the most complicated aspects of any language. And I must say that I'm really amazed with the qualifications of many of the HYPIA members. It's I've met with interesting people, so many interesting people who have studied languages that I haven't even heard of. Well, some of them I've heard of, but I can't get my head around the conjugations and, you know, the exchanges in that language. So I feel myself very lucky in that regard that I have so many talented friends and colleagues in that group.
Well, one of the reasons what we do learn languages also is to understand not only the culture of the other, precisely all the nonverbal information about the jokes, about the languages basically are different ways of creating, composing, and transmitting different concepts. Languages are different means of creating new ideas and how they transmitting. And in that sense, understanding the nuances of every language, it's a door of interesting and amazing cultures. For me, it's an interchange. It's an Ausweisch, to give and to receive. Are you agreeing with this?
It's an amazing door opener. So there's this common understanding that English would open you pretty much all the doors. That might be true to a certain extent, especially in the corporate world where a common language is required. But, you know, when you get down to spending some face time with people who come from a non-English speaking background, and as soon as you switch to their language, and once they know that you can communicate not only in a language that you can understand, but you have a mutual language where they feel at ease, it really makes the communication a lot easier, and it really breaks down a lot of barriers that you might have to overcome in another setting if you are both speaking in a language that is neither theirs or your native language. For me, it was never so much of a problem, especially for English, because I grew up speaking English, and most of my education was also in English. So I don't really consider English as a foreign language for me. But this has been particularly important for me when I first started learning German, French, and now that I'm in Switzerland, I'm still dabbling with it, but I speak the local Swiss German dialect as well. So anyone can speak German, but you know, it really takes a special effort to speak the local dialect over here. So once you switch, for example, you speak the local Swiss German dialect here in Zurich, it really changes the flow and the vibe of the conversations.
Precisely at that point, I want to make an emphasis. Our capacity as hyperpolyglots to change from one linguistic structure to another, knowing the different grammar structures, and basically us hyperpolyglots, we dominate basically two internal processes: grammar decodification and vocabulary memorization. But also, in addition to those elements regarded to math, linguistic math, or the mechanical way of learning, there are also, not every hyperpolyglot has the same methodology, because a lot of fellow hyperpolyglots prefer, or a lot of language learners prefer, to learn much more naturally, to feel, to live the language. But also, the language not only means the culture, but also eating, drinking, dancing, making love with the language. You have to stay there, and you have had the chance to travel and to live for several countries. You could experience that feeling, that sensation, live beforehand.
Definitely. Let me expand on that. Actually,
Sure.
you know, not everyone might. Well, we can all dream about it, but not everyone would have the opportunity to, spend several years in Latin America to improve their Spanish, or move to Paris to, to improve their French, or come to Germany, or Switzerland or Austria to practice their German or Turkish or whichever language you learn. But one thing, I'm still a student of Greek, modern Greek, ancient Greek. It's maybe next time. But I have been studying Greek for the last 4.5 years. And
continue.
Exactly. So, well, I don't really have any personal connections with Greece. I haven't had an incentive to learn Greek, so my family does not have Greek heritage. Greece is a country of the, right next to Turkey, so we share some common history, some common cuisine. But the biggest challenge that I had to overcome while learning Greek was, how do I study the grammar, I study the vocabulary, but I really had to struggle to keep the language relevant in my life. So my wife, for example, she's not Greek. No one in my immediate environment speaks Greek. So how do I expand on it? So I had to find reasons to be able to use the language in my daily life. I have a wonderful teacher. Her name is Angeliki. So I'm sure she's going to watch this later on. Hi, Angeliki. So we have lessons, for example, twice a week over Skype. So she's been living in Turkey. Now she lives in Italy. But I watch movies, a lot of movies on Netflix. I watch documentaries with subtitles, in Greek subtitles, sometimes English. I cheat, I must admit, because my vocabulary doesn't stretch that far. I started off initially with children's books, but then, I gradually upgraded to my reading list to more sophisticated themes. Now I'm reading things on political science and history. So long story short, if you don't have a reason to use the language, it's the language learning is such a delicate flower. I don't want to sound cheesy and poetic over here, but it takes so much emotional involvement and so much mental energy. And unless, you water this plant, it's going to die. So unless you keep it relevant in your life and you don't use it for a couple of months, couple of years, you will have some kind of passive understanding of the language, but you will not remain conversational. Well, definitely you're not going to understand the jokes in that language.
Undoubtedly. As you are living in Switzerland, we know everybody that Switzerland is a multilingual country. And
yep.
You know that's not the same concept of multilingualism rather than polylingualism, because it has to do with the right of every citizen to learn every language, being national or regional, rather than circumscribed to a single part of the territory that exclusively you have to speak only one language. In that sense, Switzerland is very multilingual up to the point that in the primary school, every student in the German part has French as signatures in addition to English. In the Romandy, in the French part, you have German and English also, or Italian optional, etc., etc. You grow with in addition to Swiss German or etc. But you grow with naturally with a multilingual environment, and such your kids. And in that sense, tell me about that phenomena in Switzerland, and later I want to make another question about about mainstream structures versus autodidactic learning. But tell me first about that educational model in Switzerland.
Sure. So I arrived in Switzerland 14 years ago. I remember it like today, September 1st, 2006.
How old are you?
I'm 38 years young. So.
I'm 41.
I'm not that young anymore. So at least you know, I've been around here long enough. I think I'm now a Swiss citizen for the last 4 years. But when I first came to this country, I was already fluent in German, but I was so amazed because I arrived in Switzerland from Belgium, where I studied at a Dutch-speaking university. But I was living in Brussels, which is bilingual, but 90% of the people speak French.
But yeah.
It was such an eye-opener for me because I landed here thinking that I spoke German, but I did not understand anything. I felt so disappointed. I thought it would be like, you know, you move from Hamburg to Berlin, and okay, maybe some dialects would be different, but you would get around. Swiss German is, well, it's not a unitary language, so to speak. It's a dialect, but it's a misnomer actually, because yeah, there are unique dialects in every canton. So the dialect that's spoken in Zurich is very different than what's spoken in Bern. That's different than from what's spoken in Basel. That's different than St. Gallen, in Wallis, etc. So, but there is, when people talk to one another in their own dialects, there is a lingua franca. They understand one another, but there is no Swiss German uniform dialect per se. It's a misnomer. So I speak to a large extent the Zurich dialect. But you know, someone approaches to me from Basel, we can understand each other, but they would speak their Basel German and I would speak mine. It's sort of similar to the situation in Scandinavia, where, you know, the Swedes, the Norwegians, and the Danes, they understand. Like I also speak Danish, and I'm a member of a Scandinavian rowing club over here, and whenever we get together, you know, the Norwegians, the Danes, and I, as the only Danish-speaking Turk, we speak a common Scandinavian language.
No, there's no Scandinaviska, but when you're speaking Danish and then you are listening to Norsk or Svensk, it's like to ask them, slowly.
Yeah, you have to dial it down. You have to dial it down. But I think, without getting sidetracked, let me make a brief remark over here. Exactly. If I had to learn a Scandinavian language all over again, I would learn Norwegian, because it's really the midway between Swedish and Danish. So it's Norwegian is understood by everyone. So, but when I speak Danish, I get around. I'm understood by the Norwegians, but with Swedish people, I'm really like, what are you talking about? Could you speak, please? And like,
great.
You know.
I mean, in Switzerland, to speak, almost everybody speaks 4 or 5 languages. But also, you have commented me immediately prior to the interview. You have commented me that up to 20% of foreigners are living permanently in Switzerland.
Yeah, it's, well, there are 20% of Switzerland is made up of foreigners. So for people speaking 4 languages, or at least being conversational in 4 languages, is not something out of the ordinary. It is very likely. But I would say people are at least nominally trilingual. So English is not really considered too much of as a foreign language anymore, because it's sort of like mathematics. I mean, there's no way around it. You have to, you kind of have to learn it. Not to, even if you work for a Swiss company or you work for an international company, you go to school, you learn English. That's a given. 20% of Switzerland is made up of foreigners, like I mentioned earlier. The largest communities are, well, Turkish. A lot of people from former Yugoslavia, Albania, but there's also a very sizable Latin American and Portuguese community over here.
There's a lot of Kosovar Albanians in Switzerland also living.
Yep, many. I say, well, not only Albania. I'm sorry. I want to make that clear. Albanian speaking. They might be from Kosovo. They might be from Macedonia.
Yeah,
they might be from Albania. A lot of Serbo-Croats, so Bosnians, Croatians, Serbs, etc. And
because they came to Switzerland like a gastarbeiters.
No, well, they came as most of them came to escape war in 1990s, but you know, there was a wave of gastarbeiters, the guest workers prior to that as well, and often that is overlooked. But there are also many Italians from Italy proper that migrated to Switzerland. Italian is a bit of a interesting case in Switzerland. You cannot really consider that as a foreign language because it's one of the national languages of Switzerland. So Switzerland has four official languages, of which three of them are national languages.
I mean,
so
in either French, German, or Italian, you can address to the administration, not Romansh. Yeah.
The federal government. So the official languages are German, French, Italian, and Romansh, which is also similar to Swiss German. It's an umbrella of dialects that fall under this name of Romansh. This language is basically what the Roman soldiers have brought to the province of Helvetia. Exactly. So, and it has its own dialects as well, like Ladina, Surselva, Puter Latin. And so it has its own subdialects as well. Unfortunately, not many people speak Romansh anymore. Roughly 40,000 people speak it, and there have been attempts to standardize a language for the last well over 40-50 years, as far as I know.
Because the majority Romansh dialects are more like a spoken language rather than a written language. It's the same phenomena that occurs with Luxembourgish.
That is true. That is true. So it did not have a standardized orthography. Then they set up a foundation called Lia Romancia, whose goal was to compile all these dialects and create a standard orthography. And funnily enough, this created a bigger schism within the Romansh speaking community in Switzerland because they couldn't agree on the orthography. So there was some kind of an allergic reaction to it for a while, but now I would say the government is really promoting the language. So you get news broadcasts. So if you go to YouTube, for example, and you search for Romansh news, documentaries, you would find a lot of online content on that language. But the biggest danger against that language is that almost all Romansh speakers are bilingual with German. So the language itself is not really growing. So it has remained mainly on the passive side for people's knowledge.
Precisely that issue I want to take into account. There are four big factors of language destruction: territorial conquest, religious imposition, economic interests, and cultural industry. What are, in your opinion, the new challenges for minority language, like, for example, mesela?
Well, as an example, let's take the case of well, now we're talking about Switzerland, my second motherland. Let's take the case of Rotoromansch. So Rotoromansch is primarily spoken in the canton of Graubünden, which is in southeastern Switzerland. But Graubünden does not.
Where you went on the holiday? Yeah.
Exactly. I was there a couple of days, so well, good. You're following me on social media. But you know, Graubünden is very much. It has a gorgeous landscape, lakes, everything that you might think of as typically Swiss. They have it. Beautiful mountains, wonderful chocolate, a lot of dairy. You know, cows and green pastures, everything. But one thing they lack is a proper industrial backbone. So they have some factories in the largest city of Graubünden, that is Chur. They have a few factories here and there, but Rotoroman speakers have been mainly seeking their fortunes outside their home canton. And, there are very high mountains in Graubünden, so it's also a challenge to go from one side of the valley to the other. Until recently, now you have the railway networks, etc. So it's easier to get around. But prior to that, people did not move so much. And when they moved, there was a very big economic incentive for them to learn the dominant language where they would be able to find jobs, and that was primarily German. So 65% of Switzerland is German speaking. Roughly 22% is French speaking, and 8 to 10% Italian speaking, and then you have well, I'm not so sure the mathematics add up, but roughly 0.5% of it speak Rotoromansch. And Rotoromansch was only added as a national language fairly recently, if I'm not mistaken, in late 1970s. So this brings me to your earlier point. So the minority language over here is clearly Rotoromansch, that had been eroded as a result of economic irrelevance, because everyone speaks German in Graubünden. Many people also speak Italian because it's so close to Romansch, but no one really learns Romansch for the sake of it.
It's more or less the same phenomenon that occurs with my Greek teacher. My Greek teacher, Savas Rosalis, Susava. I remember when I took Greek 8-month Greek classes from April to December 2018. Sava, 68-year-old guy from Leonidio, from Peloponnesus. He was born in a small 2,000 people town where the remaining speakers of Sakonica survived.
Wow!
Exactly.
The Spartans.
It's derived from an ancient Doric dialect that derived from Sakonica. Well, that dialect still are still remnants, or still it's revived, like with a summer school or with some very local program initiatives that makes that dialect alive. But it was extremely coincidence that my teacher of modern Greek is at least not I don't know if but his parents or his grandparents spoke Sakonica at home, so he remembers that language. Well, in that sense, it's interesting. It's more like a very similar phenomena that occurred with Walliser, Walser, and Sorsilvan. Well,
definitely. Let me give you another example. Now that you brought up Greek, for example, in northeastern Turkey, where my mother's side is from, we still speak this very ancient Greek dialect called Pontiaca, the Pontian Greek. which is basically the language, they still speak the language that Alexander the Great had brought 2,000 years ago. And this is the only dialect in Greek where you can still hear the infinitive form in Greek. But that's my nerdy obsession about the language itself. So you really have to feel passionate. Once you dig through it, you really find these hidden gems.
Dele come fivoliato, unzweifelt, Schubgesis, without doubt. Okay, last two questions. Innate capacity to learn languages or product of intensive training? Because I permanently ask myself, I permanently wonder about there are a lot of polyglots that prefer mainstream language in a mainstream methodology or with a mainstream certified teacher, but most of hyperpolyglots also learn every language, and most of us as an autodidact. What's your opinion about? Because for me, that I have learned half of my language as a mainstream, but also another half of language, and I speak 12, 13 languages as an autodidact, 14 with A2 Niveau von Deutsch. Grundlage Deutsch, aber yeah, 14 language. Okay, half of my 14 language as a mainstream and another half of 14 language as an autodidact. In that sense, I knew both extremes. Well, about learning as an autodidact versus mainstream learning, what's your opinion about?
I think you have to do it both. You have to do it both. I'm a strong believer in having structure when you are learning a language, but this by no means should mean that, you sit down and memorize vocabulary 8 hours a day. But at least the way I have done it, so far I have studied Dutch, Danish, Greek, Spanish, French, German, various dialects of it. And one thing that I really enjoyed in my language learning is dealing with pop culture. So when I'm learning a language, those newspapers they hand out at subway stations, the free newspapers like Metro, City Times, we have something similar in Switzerland. It's called 20 Minuten. It's really written in a simplified language that's easier for you to get your head around. The goal is that, you'll be able to, exactly, like you will be able to wrap up the newspaper in 20 minutes. And it doesn't really, you don't have to be a grammar genius to figure out so I certainly don't ignore the grammar. That is one thing I would highly advise people. Don't, learn the basics well, because you learn the vocabulary, but without the skeleton of a proper grammar basis, you would just feel like a parrot. You would understand a lot of words, but you would not be able to express yourself. When you do mainstream training or learning methods, please learn the grammar properly, but most importantly, learn what is relevant for you. So I interact with a lot of people in my profession, meeting with clients, meeting with external parties. So for me, I really have to develop, negotiation skills in those languages. So obviously it wouldn't help me if I learn, astronomy in a particular language or certain technical terms, but learn what is important for you and don't skip out on the grammar, but then make the language fun for you. For example, I love history. I love Netflix and Hulu, etc. And there are fantastic tools where you would be able to practice your language skills. Watch movies in that language, argue people online on Facebook. I'm sure you're going to find many topics where you can bounce your ideas. So use that language. And I beg you, please do not be afraid of making mistakes. Don't let this hinder your progress as well. No one's going to stop talking to you because you conjugated a verb in the wrong way while you were talking to someone in Catalan or Greek, etc. So, and people are, especially when you're talking to native speakers, as a Turkish speaker, for example, whenever I talk to Matias in Turkish, it really gives me goosebumps, you know, when I hear a foreigner speaking Turkish, because it's not really.
Beyin dil yapısı rağmen, although I have my grammar mistakes.
Hiç sorun değil. So the grammar mistakes, it happens. Trust me, native speakers also make that. But what I enjoy is, you know, read books. You can download tons of books in PDF from the internet. That most of them are publicly available from your local library. Just go dig out what's available in the library. Look what's available on Amazon or other booksellers, or many books are available on PDF as well. Read up on it. And if you are particularly, like, I love military history, I try to find books on military history in a language that I understand. And I usually start off with topics that I know very well about. So the other day, for example, I was reading a book on the Algerian War of Independence in 1960s. It's a topic that I know.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if you want to read up on something, you know, it gives you this additional boost of confidence if you're reading up on a topic that you already know about. I also read up a lot on the history of Cyprus, especially in Greek. I know that history quite well, even though I am nowhere near to knowing the entire political science terminology in Greek. I can figure it out because I know the sequence of events, and it gives me this added boost that it's like, oh, I don't know what it means, but I can figure out from the context what it means. So like I said earlier, you know, make the language work for you, make it relevant. And, you know, whenever you find a native speaker, you know, don't let them go. Just engage them in a conversation. God knows how many times I had done that, you know, whenever I found a Dutch speaker here or a Danish speaker or, you know, a Greek speaker. It's hard to find, but once you find these people, they immensely appreciate your efforts that you speak their language.
Exactly. Ilker, the last question. The necessity to learn languages, the need to learn languages just for taste or just for surviving?
For me, it's started off, well, I was always interested in languages, but you know, for the last 21 years, I lived in 5 different countries. So I really had to learn those languages to survive. Like I moved to Denmark. Okay, you can get around in English anywhere, but you know, when you move to a new country, you learn the language, but you know, you have to change your entire operating system. Like you have to learn where the post office is, where do you do your grocery shopping, where do you change money, where do you buy clothes, and how do you make friends, how do you, you know, how do you meet with other people, and what is the, you know, how do you interact with people, especially with in terms of sense of humor. Some cultures are a bit more reserved, or whatever that means, but you know, they don't laugh at the same things that you might find funny, or what you find funny could be a little off to them. So learning a language itself also comes with the added obligation to learn, you know, your body language. You know, as a Turk Mediterranean, you know, we tend to use our hands a lot. You know, many gestures.
Or for example, the way. Okay, a bit higher.
Yeah, well, try doing that to a Bulgarian, to our Bulgarian friends. You know, they
or,
would say
or if I
the
move
exact
sides,
opposite.
If I move sides, okay, I'll love them. I know that.
So it is required for survival. If you actually live in that country, you have to learn the language. Like, you know, many of the Gastarbeiter, the migrant workers, they came to Europe, to Belgium, Netherlands, France, Germany, you know, they had to learn the language to earn money. Unless you speak the language, no one's going to give you a job. So there is the economic necessity element. But, you know, I have the impression that the world is becoming even more homogeneous, even though multiculturalism is very much promoted. But with the advent of English as the lingua franca, you know, sadly, I hear more and more people saying, well, it's also an argument used by many people in Switzerland who want to eliminate French and Italian from the curriculum. They say, well, we got English. Like, why do you have to bother learning another language? But I find nothing more distressing than hearing two compatriots of the same country using a third language to be able to communicate with one another. So the more the merrier. But you know, this brings me to my earlier point as well. The language must remain relevant in your life. Back in the day, French was the lingua franca, so everyone spoke French. You know, in the academic circles, back in the medieval ages, until 18th century, it was Latin. So doing it for fun, you can learn any language for fun, as long as it is fun for you to learn it and to use it. But out of economic necessity, I think the minority languages are at a particular danger, because once your only motivation to learn a new language comes from the fact that you economically need it, I think many languages would die as a result of it, because you only need one language to survive. As long as everyone understands the language, and with that argument of economic necessity, that would really hamper the progress of learning for other languages.
In that sense, that's why our objective as HYPIA is to preserve or to foster, to preserve languages and cultures as much as possible. Ilker, ich muss dich bedanken. Çok teşekkür ederim. For me, it's a great honor to have an interview. And of course, you have a warm welcome for us.
Ben teşekkür ederim. Herzlichen Dank für die Einladung. And I hope you enjoyed this little conversation. I learned a lot from HYPIA since I joined, and you know, I met with very, very interesting people. So one final word from me is, you know, learn. It doesn't matter which language you learn, as long as it is fun for you, and as long as, you know, it is relevant for you. Make the effort, and it will come in handy and will be very useful for you in your lives. You will not regret it.
Indeed, I'm completely agree with you. Okay, çok teşekkür ederim.
Ben teşekkür ederim. Görüşmek üzere.